Hello again. In the previous episodes of my podcast dedicated to AI in the language industry, I first explained why so called pure human translation has become an illusion nowadays, and second, I presented our alternative that we called PRISM. That is, pre translation using translation memory, applying raw empty to everything that hasn't been translated, then AI-based improvement, S means human-based specialist, review editing, and finally M stands for hybrid metric-based QA. But apart from a nice acronym, you would definitely need some proof that it works, especially when it comes to rather enigmatic things like AI-based QA and AI-based improvement. Okay, so in this episode, I'm going to provide examples, real-world samples that we collected while working on the projects for our clients. Nothing artificial here. Obviously, I've selected the most striking, the most impressive ones, but still, they are all real. And I also want to express my special gratitude to Fedir Bezrukov, our AI guru and trailblazer, who provided most of the samples. Now, let's proceed with the examples. So, example number one. Here is the work setting. It's a super urgent overnight translation project for several presentations. As usual, well, as it often happens, we've only got the slide decks to be translated after 7 p.m. on the day prior to the conference. So we had to translate them overnight, and there was absolutely no time for separate reviewing or proofing. Here is exactly where AiLQA really helped us. So, imagine that. One of the decks included at least 3 slides which mentioned all the project participants on the client end, including their photographs, full names, and positions and roles. Moreover, 2 of these people had one and the same last name, and their first names were very close. One was Vera, the other one was Vicky. It's only a 3-letter difference. The first one, Vera, has already been mentioned in previous communication, so her name was in the translation memory. An overworked translator working and probably burning midnight oil sometime in the very late hours in the day has obviously got a high fuzzy translation memory match for the name of the second person, Vera, and because he was overworked, this person overlooked this difference. So there were 2 Vicas in the files, or 2 Veras. Anyway, while this might seem as a minor thing, and obviously this cannot be discovered by any standard tools, this would have definitely not improved, to put it mild, our relationship with the client, especially, imagine that, you see 2 different photos with one and the same name beneath them. Well, in this case, AiLQA, our own tool, has saved the day. It has looked at the whole thing and pointed out that first, the source was different, so it's definitely a wrong translation. And second, moreover, it said that the name Vicky is a diminutive, so probably the lady would prefer to figure on the slide deck as Victoria, that is normal full name. Man, it really saved us a lot of headache. Here is another perfect example how our AiLQA tool works. This time it was a string from a hardware maintenance manual, and the English source says, I'll have to read it, tools, multimeter, measurable secondary pipe. Well, enigmatic at best. Actually, it's complete bullshit. So let me digress for a second. Years ago, my company was working on the localization for Windows anti-server. And at that time, the server software had thousands of error messages coded inside the strings, and most of them were indecipherable. They sounded like complete rubbish, even to experts, and probably only the person who wrote them knew what they meant. So at that time, the senior project manager on the Microsoft end created a very beautiful approach. He called it adequate translation. What he said was as follows. If you encounter an incomprehensible string in the source that makes no sense, you should translate it adequately. That is, the target should be an equally incomprehensible and meaningless string. Well, a human translator or machine translation will never know. In this case of this manual, probably followed this rule of adequate translation. So it was literally translated as, I'll read it, it makes no sense, obviously, as measurement on the secondary side of the circuit. Grammatically plausible, but no sense when it comes to engineering, just common logic. So that's where our AiLQA tool flagged this thing immediately. But it went much further than that. It said that this incomprehensible words typically represent a classical so-called Chinglish artifact of an incorrect literal translation from Chinese that actually meant a diode. I mean secondary pipe in English. So obviously the original manual was written in Chinese, then translated into English, and then localized into all languages with this Chinglish mistake already embedded in the source. So instead of just pointing the mismatch, our AiLQA tool actually provided, based on the context, that is, because it deals with rectifier bridges and multimeters and testing equipment, it provided the flawless replacement source that made real sense. That is, tools, multimeter with a diode testing function, and an equally flawless translation. So in this case, it's not just an error spotted, it's a paradigm shift in quality assurance. Because traditional tools, they rely on glossary matching, but in this case, we actually needed considerably more. That is, a deep understanding, first, of the context, and second, of the engineering subject matter area, because otherwise this area would be simply never found. So it bridges the gap between a flawed source on one hand and a perfect in-context localization within the proper subject matter area on the other hand.